Today, we have the first of many videos on my 1999 Chevrolet Tracker that looks a lot like a UTV these days, with one important difference. Welcome to Ozark Garage. Follow along as I fabricate, modify, restore, and drive interesting projects. Stick around, see what's next. I call this my Truggy, because it's a tracker buggy type thing. A lot of you are probably doubting the street legality of it, but let me assure you, it is. The VIN number on the dash has not been altered, moved, or anything in any way. It still has airbags, a catalytic converter, headlights, turn signals, and functioning windshield wipers. It uses a stock gas tank with the emissions equipment intact, and even the fuel gauge works. In the grand scheme of things, it's really no different than taking a Jeep Wrangler and removing the top and doors. The windshield and cage are all still there. I kept it this way because I wanted to keep it licensed, titled, and insured as a tracker. So why a tracker? The Tracker is a direct descendant of the legendary Suzuki Samurai. The Chevy Tracker was made by Suzuki, and the only difference between the Tracker and Suzuki Grand Vitara is the badging. A friend of mine had this two-wheel drive model for his daughter to drive around. Eventually, it was abandoned in his shop with the rear axle pulled out, so I bought it from him for a few $100 and set about converting it to four-wheel drive. I used a Suzuki Samurai transfer case mounted behind the stock transmission and fabricated a steel front axle housing since the factory aluminum housings aren't known for their strength. I installed an ARB air locker in the front and a mini spool in the rear and put some 31-inch mud terrains on the factory wheels and had some fun with it. The buddy who sold me the Tracker has a first-generation Tracker turned into a buggy on 31-inch tires also, and uses it like a UTV, except it's street legal. I thought it was a great idea, so I set about chopping it up. After cutting out over 400 pounds of sheet metal, I started by replacing the rocker panels with 3/16 wall 2x3 tubing. From there, started building the rest of the cage, tying to the frame in the front and the rear. Because I didn't modify the dash or firewall, the only wiring I had to do was for the headlights and taillights. I added Mastercraft Nomad seats, 5-point harnesses, and made some body panels out of HDPE from Home Depot. My goal really was to replicate the UTV formula, reduced weight and a body that you can bash into trees. A couple months later, I took it on my very first trip to Moab. With 31-inch tires and front and rear lockers, it did everything from chicken corners to Hell's Gate on Hell's Revenge. Several states, including Utah, will license UTVs for use on secondary roads only. A 1999 Chevy Tracker, however, is perfectly legal to drive down any highway. In addition, no UTVs, even street legal ones, are allowed in national parks. So if you want to camp in the backcountry in a national park, you can't take your UTV, but you can take a Tracker. The only issue we really encountered on the first Moab trip was a moderate driveline vibration in the rear. The Suzuki Samurai transfer case has dual offset outputs. Front and rear outputs are offset to the passenger side. The Tracker rear axle had a centered input. The short wheelbase meant the rear drive shaft was really short and at a bad compound angle. Back home in the Midwest, we continued to have fun with it, but soon uncovered another issue. Full throttle assaults at muddy hill climbs began to find the weak link, the front CVs. I even made hybrid CV shafts with Ford Explorer outer joints, and they still wouldn't hold up. I was replacing them every single trip. Needless to say, I was frustrated, but I knew the only path forward was a solid axle swap. $150 later, I had a J10 with dual offset Dana 44s. As you watch my videos, you'll realize I like to maximize the bang for my buck. The cheapest way to put these axles underneath would have been with leaf springs, and a far more expensive option would have been some dual rate coilovers with external reservoirs, etc. I landed somewhere in the middle. I 3-linked the front and the rear, but used stock Jeep Wrangler TJ coils and inexpensive Monroe shocks with 11 inches of travel. It flexes well and climbs better than leaf springs would. The wheels are stock Chevy Rally wheels with homemade rock rings and 35-inch tires. I stretched the wheelbase to enable 90-degree departure and approach angles. I rebuilt the axles with 538 gears, a spool in the rear, and an ARB air locker in the front. The front also got a set of 4340 shafts. The steering is a Chevy Astro van steering box. It's a Saginaw type box with a reverse rotation and the pitman arm that sticks out the front. Hydro assist comes from a common 1.5-inch industrial hydraulic ram, but the factory rack and pinion didn't require a lot of volume, so the stock pump couldn't keep up. I made a custom bracket to mount a PSC power steering pump to the stock Suzuki engine, and hoses from Napa connected everything together. The original J20 engine started to make some lifter noise, so I swapped in a J23 from a Suzuki Aerio. The J23 is 2.3 liters and good for another 20 horsepower. It's a bolt-in swap that runs on the same ECU with the same wiring. Most importantly, it had half the miles of the original engine. Overall, I've been really happy with it in its current form. It's reliable, it goes down the highway at 65 miles an hour, and it's done most of the harder trails in Moab and Colorado. That said, the next time you see this Truggy, we're going to be making some significant changes. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and hit the bell to be notified and follow every step of the way. Thanks for watching, we'll see you next time.